I watched as my brother shifted uncomfortably in the visitor's chair across from my desk, the same brother who once received my entire college fund because he showed more academic promise. Now, 12 years later, he sat before me with a polished, resume and practice smile, asking for a senior position at the tech company I'd built from nothing into a $12 million valuation. Life has a peculiar way of bringing everything full circle. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The champagne flowed freely in the private mezzanine of the Pinnacle, San Francisco's most sought-after venue for celebrating business milestones. I raised my glass as Catherine Zhang, managing partner at Horizon Ventures, proposed a toast that brought the room of 40 investors and team members to immediate attention. To Alexandra Reeves and Nexus Solutions, Catherine announced, her voice carrying across the space. Today marks not just a successful Series B funding round of $7 million, but the achievement of a $12 million company valuation in just 4 years. In a tech landscape where female founders receive less than 3% of venture capital, Alexandra has defied every statistic and expectation. I smiled graciously, maintaining the polished composure I'd perfected over years of pitching, to investors who initially saw my gender before my ideas. The journey from coding in a rented studio apartment to this moment, standing in designer heels on hardwood floors worth more per square foot than my childhood home, felt simultaneously surreal and inevitable. My leadership team surrounded me, their faces bright with collective triumph. These were the people who had believed in my vision when it existed only in wireframes and ambitious projections, who had worked 18-hour days alongside me to transform Nexus Solutions from concept to industry innovator. Our platform that streamlined supply chain logistics for small to mid-sized businesses had gone from serving 20 local clients to over 3,000 across North America. As Catherine detailed our growth metrics and upcoming expansion plans, I caught sight of my parents near the back of the room. Their presence was unexpected. They had responded to my invitation with typical ambivalence, my father citing potential, scheduling conflicts, my mother expressing vague intentions to try to make it, yet here they were, looking simultaneously proud and uncomfortable, like tourists who had accidentally wandered into an exclusive event. Standing beside them was my brother Marcus. He had arrived 30 minutes late, missing my presentation entirely, but had managed to procure a champagne flute immediately upon arrival. At 34, 2 years my senior, Marcus still possessed the confident smile and casual demeanor that had made him the undisputed favorite throughout our childhood. The son destined for greatness, the natural heir to ambitions my parents had never managed to fulfill themselves. And what makes Nexus Solutions truly remarkable, Catherine continued, is not just its impressive growth trajectory, but its profitability from year 2, almost unheard of in today's startup ecosystem. I nodded appreciatively, though the ID compliment was nothing I hadn't earned through relentless attention to fundamentals while competitors burned through capital chasing market share. When investors had pushed for faster expansion at the expense of sustainability, I had stood firm on building revenue alongside growth. That discipline had attracted Horizon Ventures, known for backing founders with long-term vision rather than quick exit strategies. As the applause faded and conversations resumed, I navigated toward my parents, accepting congratulations from team members and investors along the way. My mother embraced me first, her perfume familiar yet somehow belonging to a different chapter of my life. "Alexandra, this is all so impressive," she said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the room, the event, perhaps the entire company. We had no idea it had become so significant. I had sent quarterly updates since founding the company, including when we hit our first $1 million in revenue, secured our initial investment round, and reached profitability. Each milestone had been acknowledged with the same distant appreciation. One might offer a distant acquaintance's good news. "Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you both could make it." I turned to my father, whose expression carried that familiar mixture of pride and evaluation I had grown accustomed to throughout my academic and professional achievements. Never quite satisfaction, always measuring against some unspoken standard. "Well done, Alexis," he said, using the diminutive form of my name I had outgrown years ago. "Marcus tells us you've become quite the business leader." The subtle redirection wasn't lost on me. The implication that they had learned about my success through my brother rather than through my direct communications. Before I could respond, Marcus stepped forward, champagne in hand. "Little sis," he grinned, offering a one-armed hug. "Looks like those coding classes paid off after all. Dad, didn't you think she was wasting time with all that computer stuff back in high school?" My father chuckled uncomfortably. "Times have changed. Hard to keep track of which skills will matter." I maintained my professional smile, the same, one I used when male investors asked if I had technical co-founders, despite my computer science degree from the community college I had attended while working full-time. Technology tends to reward people who can see where things are heading, not just where they are. Catherine approached our group, extending her hand to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Reeves, it's a pleasure to meet Alexandra's family. Your daughter is truly exceptional, one of the most disciplined and visionary founders in our portfolio." My mother brightened at the external validation. She was always so determined, even as a child. Never could talk her out of anything once she set her mind to it. "That determination has created significant value for our investors," Catherine replied smoothly. "We're projecting Nexus will cross the $20 million valuation threshold within 18 months. My father raised his eyebrows. "20 million? That's remarkable." There was a new note in his voice, something I'd rarely heard directed toward me. Respect, perhaps, or recalculation. Marcus swirled his champagne with practiced nonchalance. "The tech bubble is something else these days. Everyone's a millionaire on paper." "Nexus isn't a bubble valuation, Mr. Reeves," Catherine corrected him politely but firmly. "The company has been profitable for 2 years with a diversified client base and recurring revenue model. Alexandra has built something with remarkable fundamentals." I watched my brother's expression shift subtly as Catherine continued highlighting specific achievements: our client retention rate, our proprietary algorithms, our industry-leading satisfaction metrics. These weren't vanity statistics or inflated projections. They were the measurable results of 4 years of relentless work and strategic vision. "Alexandra, we should introduce your family to the development team," Catherine suggested. "They're the ones who bring your vision to life so brilliantly." As we moved toward a group of engineers engaged in animated conversation, my phone vibrated with a calendar notification. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Marcus Reeves, informational interview." The appointment had been scheduled through my executive assistant 3 weeks ago with no indication that the potential candidate was my brother. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same sensation I'd experienced at 17 when my parents had sat me down at our kitchen table to explain why the college fund I'd been promised would instead finance Marcus's MBA after his undergraduate grades had proven insufficient for scholarship consideration. "He has so much potential," my mother had explained gently. "And you're so practical, Alexandra. You'll find another way." They had been right about one thing. I had found another way. But now, staring at my brother's practiced confidence as he chatted with my lead developer about technological innovations he barely understood, I wondered if Marcus was finally discovering that potential alone wasn't enough in a world that ultimately demanded results. "Alexandra?" Catherine's voice broke through my thoughts. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," I replied, the professional mask slipping back into place. "Just thinking about tomorrow's meetings." "Including the one with your brother?" she asked quietly, her perception as sharp as I'd come to expect. At my surprised look, she smiled. "Your assistant mentioned it when we were reviewing your schedule." She didn't realize the connection. Neither did I until just now, I admitted. Apparently, Marcus is interested in joining Nexus Solutions. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but her eyes reflected understanding. She had risen through male-dominated venture capital ranks through exceptional talent and strategic patience. She recognized family dynamics without needing explanations. Your company, your decision, she said simply. Just remember why investors backed you and not someone else. As the evening continued, I circulated through the room, discussing expansion, plans with investors, and acknowledging team members whose contributions had made our success possible. My family remained for another hour, my parents increasingly impressed as they encountered one team member after another who spoke of my leadership with genuine respect and admiration. When they finally prepared to leave, my mother embraced me again. We're so proud of you, Alexandra. You've always been so capable. The word hung between us. Not brilliant, not exceptional, but capable. The quality one might attribute to a reliable appliance rather than a visionary founder. Yet even this measured praise represented evolution in how they perceived me. Thanks for coming, I replied, meaning it despite everything. Some part of me, perhaps the 17-year-old girl who had sobbed in her bedroom after learning her educational future had been sacrificed for her brothers, still hungered for their recognition. Marcus lingered after our parents headed toward the elevator. Impressive party, sis. Looks like you've built something real here. What can I help you with tomorrow, Marcus? I asked directly, choosing efficiency over pretense. His smile faltered, slightly before recovering. Straight to business, huh? Always were the practical one. He straightened his designer tie, a detail that seemed incongruous with someone seeking employment. I've been considering a career pivot. My network includes connections that could be valuable to a growing company like yours. Send your resume. Ahead if you haven't already, I replied, maintaining professional distance. My assistant will forward it to HR for review before our meeting. HR? He laughed as if I'd made a joke. Come on, Alexis. It's me. I thought we could just talk about where I might fit into your operation. Something at the executive level, obviously. The presumption was so familiar that it almost didn't register as extraordinary. Throughout our lives, Marcus had assumed primacy as his birthright, the better room during family vacations, the newer car when we reached driving age, and ultimately, the educational funding that should have been divided equally between us. Everyone at the executive level has earned their position through exceptional contribution to Nexus, I explained. Calmly. We'll discuss potential opportunities tomorrow based on your qualifications. His expression tightened momentarily before relaxing into practiced charm. Always the meticulous one. That's why you're good at this stuff. He gestured around at the celebration. Looking forward to our chat tomorrow. This could be good for both of us. After Marcus departed, I remained at the venue until the last guests had left. Catherine found me on the mezzanine's terrace, looking out at San Francisco's illuminated skyline. Congratulations again, she said, joining me at the railing. Today represents a significant milestone. You should be proud. I am, I replied. And it was true. The validation wasn't just in the funding or valuation, but in building something substantial without family connections, without inherited advantage, without even the educational credentials most founders in our industry possessed. Your brother seems quite confident about tomorrow's meeting, Catherine observed neutrally. I laughed softly. Marcus has been confident about everything since he was 5 years old, and my parents convinced themselves he was gifted because he memorized dinosaur names. That confidence got him my college fund. Catherine raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details. Instead, she asked the question that mattered. What are you going to do? I considered the complexity of family obligation against the responsibility I held to my company, my team, and the investors who had backed my vision. I'm going to evaluate him as I would any candidate. No advantages, no penalties. Fair enough, she nodded. Though few candidates walk in with your history. As Catherine left to speak with the event coordinator, I remained on the terrace, thinking about the path that had led me here. After losing my college fund, I had worked retail jobs while attending community college part-time, eventually earning an associate's degree in computer science. I had taught myself additional programming languages through online courses, built websites for local businesses to establish a portfolio, and finally landed an entry-level development position at a logistics company. The idea for Nexus Solutions had come from observing inefficiencies in how small businesses manage their supply chains, problems invisible to larger companies but catastrophic for operations with thin margins. I had coded the first prototype. During nights and weekends, validated the concept with potential customers on my own time, and resigned only when I had secured enough angel investment to pay myself a minimal salary for 12 months. Those early days had been a crucible of 18-hour workdays, rejections from investors who couldn't envision a female founder succeeding in enterprise software, and constant pressure to demonstrate traction with limited resources. While Marcus had been posting photos from business conferences in exotic locations, I had been sleeping on a futon in the small office space I shared with my first 2 employees. The contrast wasn't about intelligence or even work ethic. Marcus was smart and could be diligent when properly motivated. The difference was that he had been given opportunity after opportunity, safety net after safety net, while I had built everything from ground zero with the constant awareness that failure meant personal financial ruin. Now, as I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave the celebration of my company's success, I wondered what Marcus would bring to our meeting tomorrow beyond confidence and family connection. Whatever it was, it would need to be substantial. Nexus Solutions had become too important, to me, to my team, to our clients, to compromise its standards for anyone, especially the brother who had benefited from my sacrifice. I texted my driver that I was ready to depart, slipping my phone back into my pocket as I took one last look at the space where my achievement had been recognized and celebrated. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had affirmed what I had always known. The path forward wasn't through seeking approval from those who had underestimated me, but through continuing to build something they couldn't ignore. The elevator doors closed, separating me from the remnants of the celebration and carrying me toward the inevitable confrontation morning would bring. Whatever happened with Marcus, one thing was certain: I was no longer the 17-year-old girl who had watched her future handed to her brother. I was the founder and CEO of a $12 million company, and that reality would define our interaction far more than shared DNA or childhood dynamics. As my car navigated through San Francisco's evening traffic toward my apartment, I mentally prepared for tomorrow's meeting. It wasn't just about Marcus or even about our complicated history. It was about maintaining the standards that had built Nexus Solutions: meritocracy, accountability, and the unwavering belief that results matter more than potential or pedigree. The principles that had been absent from my family's decision to redirect my educational funding to my brother would now govern his attempt to join the company I had built despite that decision. The symmetry wasn't lost on me, nor was the responsibility to ensure that whatever happened next reflected the values I had fought to establish, both personally and professionally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sleep evaded me that night despite physical exhaustion. I lay awake in my penthouse apartment, reviewing Marcus's resume on my tablet while the city lights of San Francisco cast shifting patterns across my ceiling. The document was professionally formatted and impressive at first glance. MBA from Stanford, series of positions with ascending titles at recognizable companies, polished LinkedIn recommendations, yet something felt off about the narrative it presented. I opened my laptop and began a more thorough investigation. 2 hours later, I had compiled a document of my own, a detailed analysis of my brother's actual contributions at each role he'd listed. Through careful cross-referencing of dates with company announcements, conversations with industry contacts, and examination of project outcomes, a different picture emerged than the one presented in his resume. Marcus had indeed worked at all. The companies listed, but his tenures were shorter than indicated. He had been part of teams responsible for the successes he claimed, but rarely in the leadership capacity suggested. Most tellingly, he had departed each position shortly before or after major project implementations, just early enough to claim credit for initiatives without being accountable for their long-term outcomes. It was a masterfully crafted career, of appearances rather than achievements, something I might not have recognized before building Nexus and learning to evaluate talent beyond credentials and confidence. Marcus had perfected the art of corporate positioning, always ensuring he was visible during launches and announcements while mysteriously absent when metrics were calculated months later. By 5:30 a.m., I abandoned any pretense of sleep. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation, and headed to the office 3 hours before my scheduled meeting with Marcus. The streets of San Francisco were quiet, that liminal space between night workers heading home and day workers beginning their commutes. My driver, accustomed to my early hours, navigated efficiently through the empty streets. "Big day, Ms. Reeves?" he asked, meeting my eyes, briefly in the rearview mirror. "Just another Tuesday, Devon," I replied, though we both knew my typical arrival time was 7 a.m., not 6 now. The Nexus Solutions headquarters occupied 3 floors of a renovated industrial building in Soma. I had chosen the location for its character and accessibility rather than prestige, investing in thoughtful interior design that reflected our company values: transparent glass-walled conference rooms, collaborative spaces balanced with quiet focus areas, and environmental sustainability features throughout. The space communicated purpose rather than pretension, precisely the message I wanted employees and visitors to absorb. The security guard looked up in surprise as I entered the lobby. "Morning, Ms. Reeves. You're here early, even for you." "Some days require extra preparation, Miguel," I replied, signing in despite the fact that my face and biomarkers were recognized by our security system. The small ritual connected me to the physical reality of the company I'd built, a reminder that Nexus existed beyond code and contracts, embodied in this building and the people who would soon fill it. I took the elevator to our main floor, the doors opening to reveal a space illuminated only by security lighting and the gray dawn filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. There was something powerful about experiencing the office in this dormant state, before the energy of 75 employees transformed it into the dynamic environment I'd designed. As I walked toward my office, I passed the wall where we displayed our company journey. Photographs marking significant milestones from our founding to present day. The first image showed me and my 2 original developers working in the tiny, rented office space, surrounded by whiteboards and empty energy drink cans. Subsequent photos captured each phase of our growth. Our first major client signing, moving into our initial small office, the team expanding to 10, then 20, then 50, our first major industry award. The visual timeline contained no references to my life before Nexus. No childhood photos, no family connections, nothing linking my achievement to inherited advantage or external support. This absence wasn't accidental. I had built Nexus from nothing, and its story began with my decision to create it, not with the circumstances that had preceded that choice. The final image on the wall was from yesterday's Series B announcement, Catherine and me shaking hands, as team members applauded in the background. I made a mental note to have our communications team add it to the timeline once professional photographs were available. Our story was still being written. In my office, I powered up my computer and reviewed my schedule. The day included the 9 a.m. meeting with Marcus, followed by a product development review, one-on-ones with my executive team, and a late afternoon call with potential partners in Europe. A full day, but not unusually so. At 7:15, Diane arrived, my executive assistant who had been with Nexus since we could barely afford her salary. She had believed in my vision enough to leave a secure position at an established tech firm, becoming the operational backbone that allowed me to focus on strategy and growth. "Good morning," she said, setting a cup of tea on my desk. Earl Grey, with a splash of almond milk, prepared exactly as I preferred. "I see you're preparing for your brother's interview." Her tone contained no judgment, but the slight emphasis on brother acknowledged the unusual nature of the meeting. Diane knew more about my background than most at Nexus, having been present during critical early phases when the boundary between personal and professional life blurred by necessity. "I've been researching his background," I replied, gesturing to my laptop screen where I'd compiled my findings. "His resume requires some context." Diane nodded, unsurprised. HR flagged several verification challenges yesterday. Dates that don't quite align. Responsibilities that seem expanded from what references describe. She placed a folder on my desk. Their preliminary report, including feedback from Natalie after she conducted the initial phone screening. I opened the folder to find a detailed analysis from our HR team, including notes from Natalie Chen, our head of talent acquisition who had built recruitment processes that prioritized demonstrated skills over credentials. Her assessment of Marcus was diplomatic but direct. Candidate presents well and has relevant industry knowledge, but shows limited evidence of execution-focused leadership. Recommend technical assessment and structured behavioral interview before proceeding to next stage. Did Marcus know this was the feedback when he scheduled directly with me? I asked. He was informed of our standard process, Diane replied carefully. But he reached out to you personally afterward. I believe his text message referenced cutting through red tape given family connection. I vaguely remembered seeing the message, but had delegated the scheduling to Diane amidst preparations for the funding announcement. The presumption was characteristic of Marcus, expecting that shared DNA entitled him to circumvent systems designed to maintain our company's standards. "I see," I said, closing the folder. "Please let Natalie know I've received her assessment and appreciate the thoroughness. I'll conduct today's conversation as a preliminary discussion rather than a formal interview." "Of course," Diane nodded, understanding the subtle distinction. "Will you need HR present?" "Not necessary. I'll document the conversation myself." The decision wasn't about avoiding accountability, but maintaining an environment where Marcus might speak more freely, without performance for additional audience members. As 9 a.m. approached, the office had filled with Nexus employees. Thrai. Energy shifted from morning quietude to purposeful activity. Engineers collaborated at whiteboards, project managers updated timelines, sales team members engaged in animated calls with potential clients. This was the ecosystem I had cultivated, where outcomes mattered more than optics, where contribution was measured by impact rather than impression. At precisely 8:55, Diane's voice came through my intercom. "Marcus Reeves has arrived. He's 5 minutes early. Please offer him water or coffee and let him know I'll be ready at 9:1 I replied, using the remaining time to center myself. This meeting needed to be conducted with the same objectivity I would extend to any candidate, despite the complicated history between us. At 9 sharp, my office door opened and Marcus entered, looking professionally polished in a tailored blue suit that probably cost more than my first developer's monthly salary. His confident smile faltered slightly as he took in my office, minimal and functional rather than the grandiose space often associated with founder CEOs. "Alexandra," he greeted me, extending his hand across my desk. "Impressive operation you're running here." I shook his hand firmly, noting that he had reverted to my full name rather than the diminutive he had used last night. "Thank you, Marcus. Please, have a seat." As he settled into the chair across from my desk, I observed subtle signs of tension beneath his practiced composure. A slight rigidity in his posture, the way his eyes darted to the recognition awards displayed on my credenza, the almost imperceptible adjustment of his tie. "Before we begin," I said, opening his resume on my tablet, "I want to clarify the purpose of our conversation today. This is an exploratory discussion about potential fit, not a formal interview for a specific position. Our hiring process includes multiple steps designed to ensure alignment between candidates' skills and our organizational needs." Marcus's expression flickered with momentary surprise before settling back into confident agreeability. "Of course, though I assumed given our connection we might expedite certain formalities. At Nexus, we maintain consistent processes for all candidates," I replied evenly. "Family connections don't alter our commitment to meritocratic hiring." The statement established the fundamental principle that would govern our interaction. The same principle that had been notably absent 12 years ago when my college fund had been redirected, based on presumed potential rather than demonstrated achievement. "Fair enough," he conceded with a small laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Always the stickler for process, even as a kid. Remember how you used to organize your bookshelf by subject and author while mine looked like a hurricane hit it?" The attempted pivot to familiar reminiscence was a classic Marcus technique, establishing connection through shared history to circumvent formal structures. I acknowledged it with a brief smile, but redirected to the matter at hand. "Let's start with your current situation. Your resume indicates you're still employed at Velcor Industries as Director of Business Development, but I understand you're seeking new opportunities?" Marcus leaned back slightly, projecting casual confidence. "Technically still employed, yes, though I've been exploring options for the past few months. Velcor is undergoing some strategic shifts that don't align with my career trajectory." "I see," I nodded, making a note on my tablet. "And these strategic shifts, would they include the company's decision to discontinue the expansion initiative you were leading after preliminary market results fell short of projections?" The question, derived from my early morning research, landed with precision. Marcus's expression tightened momentarily before recovering. "You've done your homework, I see. Always thorough. Understanding context helps me evaluate opportunities." "Accurately," I replied, neither confirming nor denying his assessment. "The initiative wasn't discontinued, merely restructured," he clarified, adjusting his position slightly. "Market conditions necessitated a more cautious approach than initially planned. These things happen in business." "They do," I agreed. "Which is why at Nexus, we emphasize accountability throughout project life cycles, from conception through implementation and ongoing assessment. Results matter more than intentions." The implicit contrast with Marcus's pattern of departing before accountability phases wasn't lost on him. His smile took on a forced quality. "Speaking of results, I was impressed by what I saw yesterday. $12 million valuation is significant for a company your age. You've clearly found your niche." The subtle condescension in "for a company your age" and "found your niche" revealed more than perhaps he intended. A framework that still positioned my achievement as somehow smaller or more specialized than it was. It was the same diminishment I had encountered throughout my life, particularly from family members who couldn't quite reconcile the Alexandra they had underestimated with the evidence of success before them. Nexus has established itself as an industry leader in supply chain optimization for small to mid-sized businesses. I corrected him gently but firmly. Our valuation reflects not just current revenue, but our projected growth trajectory and the proprietary technology we've developed. But you're right, results speak for themselves. I pulled up a series of metrics on my tablet and turned the screen toward him. These are our key performance indicators over the past 4 years: revenue growth, client retention, implementation. Timelines and team productivity have all exceeded industry standards consistently. Marcus glanced at the screen, nodding with professional appreciation, though his eyes didn't linger on the actual numbers. Impressive, consistent execution is rare in early-stage companies. We're not early-stage anymore, I noted. We're entering a growth phase that requires specialized talent with demonstrated expertise in scaling operations while maintaining quality. I turned the tablet back toward myself. Which brings me to your interest in Nexus. What specific role do you envision for yourself here? The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. Marcus had always operated in environments where ambiguity served his purposes, where titles could be inflated, responsibilities blurred, and results attributed based on proximity rather than contribution. Nexus's culture of clarity and accountability represented a fundamental challenge to that approach. I see myself in a strategic leadership position, he replied after a brief hesitation. Something that leverages my MBA and extensive business development experience. Perhaps Chief Business Officer or SVP of Strategic Partnerships? The presumption was breathtaking, suggesting executive leadership at a company he knew virtually nothing about, based largely on credentials and family connection. Yet it was consistent with the entitlement that had characterized our family dynamic throughout our lives. Those are substantial roles that would typically require extensive experience directly relevant to our industry and business model. I observed. Can you share specific examples of enterprise software experience or supply chain expertise from your background? Marcus shifted slightly, recognition dawning that this conversation wouldn't follow the familiar pattern where charm and confidence substituted for substance. My experience is more industry agnostic, he explained. I specialize in relationship building and strategic vision rather than vertical-specific expertise. The fundamentals of business development apply across sectors. At Nexus, we've found that domain knowledge significantly impacts effectiveness, particularly at leadership levels, I replied. Our current executive team brings decades of combined experience in software development, supply chain logistics, and enterprise sales specific to our market segment. I pulled up another document on my tablet, our organizational chart showing the structured growth path from entry-level positions through team leadership to executive roles. Every member of our leadership team has demonstrated exceptional performance within our organization or brought highly specialized expertise from directly relevant positions elsewhere. Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Are you saying there's no place for me at the executive level? The question crystallized the fundamental disconnect between us, his assumption of entitlement colliding with my insistence on earned authority. It mirrored the dynamic that had played out when my college fund was reallocated to finance his MBA, despite my superior academic record and demonstrated commitment. I'm saying executive roles at Nexus are earned through exceptional contribution and directly relevant expertise, I clarified. We have several potential entry points for professionals transitioning from adjacent industries, with advancement opportunities based on performance. I turned my tablet toward him again, this time displaying our currently open positions. These roles might align better with your transferable skills while providing opportunity to develop domain-specific knowledge. Marcus glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from confidence to something approaching disbelief as he registered that the positions I was suggesting were at least 2 levels below his current title and expected compensation. Alexandra, he said, reverting to my full name as if to establish adult-to-adult communication. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not looking to start over or take a step backward in my career. I thought given our relationship and my experience, we could create a position that recognizes what I bring to the table. What exactly do you bring to the table, Marcus? I asked, the question simple, but fundamental. Not in terms of potential or credentials, but in demonstrated expertise directly relevant to Nexus's business? The bluntness of the question created a moment of genuine silence as Marcus struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't simply restate the generalities he had already offered. For perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, he was confronting a scenario where family connection and confident presentation wouldn't override objective assessment. I bring perspective, he finally said, his tone shifting to something more authentic than his previous polished responses. I bring an MBA from Stanford, connections throughout the industry, and yes, family loyalty. I'm your brother, Alexandra. Doesn't that count for something in your world? And there it was, the appeal to family obligation when merit-based arguments failed. It was the same dynamic that had governed the decision about my college fund, the same implicit hierarchy of entitlement that had shaped our family's choices throughout our lives. Family matters deeply to me, I replied carefully. But Nexus isn't my personal property to distribute based on family connection. I have fiduciary responsibilities to our investors, ethical obligations to our team members who have earned their positions, and a commitment to the meritocratic culture we've built. I closed my tablet and met his gaze directly. I would never subject you to standards different from those we apply to any candidate, Marcus. That would undermine both your dignity and our organizational integrity. Marcus's expression hardened as the implications of my response settled between us. The professional veneer he had maintained since entering my office began to crack, revealing the familiar entitled frustration I had witnessed throughout our childhood whenever he encountered an obstacle not easily charmed away. "This isn't what I expected from you, Alexandra," he said, his tone shifting from collegial to accusatory. "After everything our family has done for you, I thought you'd be more willing to help your own brother." The statement was so fundamentally disconnected from reality that I needed a moment to process it. Everything our family had done for me, the family that had redirected my college fund to finance his MBA, the parents who had consistently prioritized his potential over my achievement? What exactly has our family done for me, Marcus? I asked quietly, genuine curiosity in my tone. I'm interested in your perspective on this. He blinked, seemingly caught off guard by the question. They supported you, encouraged you. Dad helped you with your science projects. Mom drove you to those coding workshops in high school. Dad helped with my science projects because I consistently won regional competitions, bringing recognition he valued. Mom drove me to coding workshops that I researched and registered for myself, using babysitting money to pay the fees, I clarified. Neither of those examples represents exceptional sacrifice or investment in my future. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, sensing he had ventured onto unstable ground. They gave you a stable home, a good education. Until they didn't, I interrupted gently. Until they decided my education was less important than yours. Until they took the money explicitly saved for my college and gave it to you instead. The memory surfaced with unexpected clarity, sitting at our kitchen table as my mother explained with practiced sympathy that circumstances had changed. That Marcus's MBA would provide better return on investment for the family than my undergraduate degree. That I was practical enough to find another way forward while Marcus needed the support to reach his potential. That was their decision, not mine, Marcus protested, though his eyes slid away from direct contact. I didn't ask them to give me your college fund. Did you refuse it? I asked simply. His silence was answer enough. I'm not bringing this up to assign blame, Marcus. It happened. I found another path. I gestured to the office around us, the physical manifestation of that alternative path. But I won't pretend our family has been some extraordinary support system in my life when the evidence suggests otherwise. Marcus leaned forward, frustration evident in his posture. So this is revenge? Punishing me for something our parents decided 12 years ago? Refusing to help me when you're clearly in a position to do so? This isn't about revenge. It's about maintaining the principles that built Nexus, I explained. We hire based on demonstrated ability and cultural fit, not family connection or theoretical potential. Those principles have created a company culture that attracts exceptional talent and delivers consistent results for our clients. I paused, considering how to frame what needed to be said next. The truth is, Marcus, your resume doesn't align with our current needs at the executive level. and the discrepancies our HR team identified between your stated responsibilities and verified accomplishments raise concerns about how your performance would translate in our results-oriented environment. The directness of my assessment visibly impacted him. Marcus had navigated most of his professional life in spaces where perception management outweighed performance measurement, where charm and confidence created opportunities regardless of proven capability. Nexus's meritocratic environment represented a fundamental challenge to that approach. "I see," he said finally, his tone cooler now. "So, the little sister who always lived in my shadow is enjoying having the upper hand for once. That's what this is really about, isn't it?" The characterization was so completely inverted from reality that I almost laughed. I had never lived in Marcus's shadow. I had simply been rendered invisible by our parents' persistent belief in his potential, despite mounting evidence of my actual achievement. The pattern had continued from childhood science fairs through high school academic honors and into early adulthood, where my consistent results were perpetually overshadowed by his perpetual promise. "This isn't about personal dynamics, Marcus. It's about building a company based on merit rather than connection," I replied evenly. "The same principle that should have governed the decision about my college fund 12 years ago. The principle that everyone deserves opportunity based on what they've earned and demonstrated, not based on family position or theoretical potential." I opened his resume again on my tablet, shifting to a more constructive approach. "If you're genuinely interested in joining Nexus, I can connect you with our HR team to discuss positions that might align with your verified skills. You'd go through our standard assessment process, and advancement would depend on your performance rather than our relationship." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, calculation evident in his expression. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted once more, this time to something closer to the genuine brother I occasionally glimpsed beneath the layers of entitlement and performance. "Level with me, Alexandra. Do you actually think I could succeed here? In your company? With your rules?" The question contained a vulnerability I rarely witnessed in him, a momentary suspension of the confidence that typically insulated him from genuine self-assessment. It deserved an honest answer. "I think you're intelligent and personable, with strong interpersonal skills that could be valuable in certain roles," I replied carefully. "But Nexus operates on a foundation of accountability and measurable contribution. We don't have positions where charm substitutes for execution or where responsibility can be deflected when outcomes don't match projections." I gestured toward the wall of windows overlooking our open office plan, where engineers collaborated at standing desks and project managers updated digital tracking boards. "Everyone here is evaluated on what they deliver, not what they promise. It's a different environment than what you've experienced in previous roles." Marcus followed my gaze, studying the activity beyond my office with uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. "They respect you," he observed, watching as a team member caught my eye through the glass and offered a quick, genuine smile of acknowledgement. "Not fear or obligation, actual respect." "We've built that culture deliberately," I confirmed. "Respect earned through consistent leadership and demonstrated expertise, not demanded through title or position." Something shifted in his expression, a subtle recalibration as he absorbed the reality of what I had created and how fundamentally it differed from the hierarchical environments he had navigated throughout his career. "I don't think I'm what you're looking for," he said finally, a note of genuine realization in his voice. "At least, not at this point in my career." The acknowledgement represented perhaps the most honest self-assessment I had ever heard from my brother. I nodded, appreciating the moment of clarity between us. "That's a fair conclusion, and I respect your recognition of it," I replied. "But it doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. If you're interested in developing the skills and approach that would make you successful in an environment like Nexus, we could discuss that path." Marcus gathered his portfolio, a mix of emotions playing across his face. I need to think about some things, he said, standing to depart. This conversation wasn't what I expected, but maybe it was what I needed. As he reached for the door, he paused, turning back with uncharacteristic hesitation. For what it's worth, I was wrong about you living in my shadow. I think maybe it was the other way around, and I just couldn't see it. The admission, partial though it was, represented more growth than I had witnessed from Marcus in years. I nodded acknowledgement without pushing for more, understanding that genuine realization couldn't be forced or rushed. After he left, I remained at my desk, processing the encounter and its implications not just for our relationship, but for my own journey. For years, I had carried the weight of our family's decision about my education, not as a defining limitation, but as a private motivation that fueled my determination to succeed, despite rather than because of my circumstances. Diane's voice came through the intercom, interrupting my reflection. Your product development meeting begins in 10 minutes. Do you need anything before then? I'm all set, I replied, mentally shifting back to the operational demands of the day. But could you schedule 30 minutes with Natalie from HR this afternoon? I want to discuss potential development pathways for candidates transitioning from adjacent industries. Of course, Diane confirmed. And your brother? Will he be returning for additional interviews? The question was professionally framed, but acknowledged the unusual nature of the situation. I appreciated Diane's ability to navigate sensitive topics with both discretion and necessary directness. Unclear at this point, I answered honestly. But if he does express further interest, he'll go through our standard process like any other candidate. As I prepared for my next meeting, gathering product roadmap documents and quarterly development metrics, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How did the meeting with Marcus go? Your father and I are so excited about you two working together. The message revealed so much about their continued expectations and assumptions, the presumption that I would naturally hire Marcus regardless of qualification, the excitement about working together that imagined a relationship of equals rather than the reality of our different professional trajectories. I set the phone aside without responding immediately, needing to focus on the product development meeting rather than family dynamics. The concerns of 75 employees, thousands of clients, and multiple investors rightfully took precedence over my parents' persistent misreading of both my company and my relationship with my brother. Later that afternoon, between meetings, with my executive team, I found time to call Catherine Zhang to update her on key developments since our funding announcement. After discussing several strategic initiatives and upcoming client partnerships, she asked the question I had been anticipating. And how did the conversation with your brother proceed? Any insights worth sharing? Catherine's interest wasn't merely personal curiosity. As our lead investor, she maintained appropriate awareness of anything that might impact Nexus's leadership or strategic direction. A family member joining the executive team would certainly qualify as relevant information. Marcus and I had a productive discussion that clarified the disconnect between his experience and our current needs, I replied carefully. He won't be joining Nexus at this time. Catherine made a small sound of acknowledgement, neither approval nor disappointment. Family business dynamics are uniquely challenging, she observed, even when the business itself wasn't originally family-created. In this case, the challenge was maintaining the same standards for family that we apply to all candidates, I explained. Marcus has followed a different professional path that hasn't developed the specific skills and approach we value at Nexus. Your clarity is one of the qualities that attracted our investment, Catherine noted. Many founders struggle to maintain objectivity when personal relationships intersect with business decisions. Her observation highlighted something I had learned through necessity rather than training, the discipline of separating emotional history from present reality when making decisions that affected other people's livelihoods and futures. That separation hadn't been taught in any class or mentorship. It had developed through the crucible of building something substantial from nothing while navigating the complicated dynamics of a family that consistently underestimated my capacity. After ending the call with Catherine, I found myself drawn to the conference room where we displayed artifacts from Nexus's founding period. The space served as both practical meeting area and living museum of our company's evolution, preserving tangible reminders of the journey from concept to current success. The walls featured framed items that might seem mundane to outsiders but carried profound significance to those who understood our history. The original napkin sketch of our platform architecture, the first contract signed with our initial client, the building permit for office renovations, the certificate of incorporation with my signature as founder and CEO. One shadow box contained the faded community college ID card I had used while earning my associate's degree in computer science. The alternative path I had created after my planned university education became financially impossible. Beside it hung the acceptance letter from MIT's undergraduate program that had become meaningless once my college fund was redirected to Marcus's MBA. These artifacts weren't displayed out of bitterness or resentment, but as authentic documentation of the company's origins. Nexus hadn't emerged from privileged circumstances or inherited advantage. It had been built through determination, strategic vision, and relentless execution despite initial limitations. As I studied these physical reminders of our journey, my executive team began arriving for our scheduled strategy session. Each member represented a carefully selected addition to Nexus's leadership, professionals who had demonstrated exceptional capability and alignment with our core values. David Chen, our CTO, had joined when we could barely afford his reduced salary, believing in our technical vision enough to leave a secure position at a major tech firm. Imani Washington had built our client success department from scratch, establishing the proactive support model that had become a competitive differentiator. Michael Kaminsky had transformed our sales approach, implementing the consultative methodology that consistently outperformed industry conversion metrics. None had been selected based on family connection or superficial impression. Each had earned their position through demonstrated expertise and measurable contribution to our collective success. "Productive morning?" David asked as he settled into his usual seat, sensing something in my expression that suggested significant events had transpired. "Clarifying," I replied with a slight smile. "Sometimes confronting historical patterns helps validate the principles we've built here." David nodded, understanding the reference without requiring elaboration. As one of my earliest hires, he had witnessed portions of my family dynamic firsthand during Nexus's formative period, when boundaries between personal and professional were necessarily more permeable. As the rest of the executive team arrived, conversation shifted to our growth strategy and upcoming product initiatives. We discussed development timelines, market expansion opportunities, and talent acquisition priorities with the focused intentionality that characterized Nexus's leadership approach. 3 hours later, as the meeting concluded with clear action items and accountability assignments, I was struck by the contrast between this collaborative environment and the hierarchical family structure that had shaped my early expectations of how authority and recognition functioned. At Nexus, contribution determined influence more than title or tenure. Ideas were evaluated on merit rather than source. Achievement was recognized based on measurable impact rather than potential or pedigree. We had built a system fundamentally different from the one that had redirected my college fund based on gender expectations and birth order rather than demonstrated capability. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, my phone displayed another text from my mother. "Haven't heard from either of you about the meeting. Everything okay? Your father and I were thinking family dinner this weekend to discuss next steps." The message revealed the persistent gap between their understanding and reality, the assumption that Marcus would naturally join Nexus, that next steps required family discussion rather than professional standards, that their involvement was appropriate in decisions regarding my company's hiring practices. After considering various responses, I opted for simple clarity. Marcus and I had a productive conversation about his career path. We both have busy schedules this weekend, but I'll reach out about dinner another time. The deliberately vague response wouldn't satisfy their curiosity, but would prevent premature family dynamics before I had opportunity to speak with Marcus again. His parting comment had suggested potential for growth in his perspective. Growth that might be undermined by immediate parental intervention focused on securing him a position regardless of qualification. As my driver navigated evening traffic toward my apartment, I received an unexpected text from Marcus himself. Been thinking about our conversation all day. Some hard truths to process. Can we talk again later this week? Just us. The message contained none of the entitlement or performance that had characterized most of our adult interactions. Instead, it offered something I had rarely witnessed from my brother: authentic reflection and initiative without parental mediation. I responded simply, "Thursday evening, 7 p.m., my office or dinner elsewhere if you prefer." His reply came quickly, "Dinner, somewhere neutral. I'll send options tomorrow." This exchange, brief though it was, represented potential shift in our relationship dynamic, communication between adults with separate lives and perspectives, rather than siblings perpetually positioned within our parents' expectations and assumptions. As the car pulled up to my building, I found myself contemplating what genuine reconciliation might look like between Marcus and me, not the superficial harmony our parents had always prioritized, where maintenance of family mythology took precedence over authentic recognition of reality, but something more substantive: mutual acknowledgement of our different paths and the choices, both personal and external, that had shaped them. The doorman greeted me by name as I entered the lobby of my building, a luxury condominium I had purchased after our Series A funding round. The space represented not just financial success, but the security I had systematically built, after experiencing the fundamental insecurity of having promised educational support abruptly withdrawn. "Package arrived for you, Ms. Reeves," he noted, retrieving a small box from behind the desk. "Came by courier about an hour ago." I thanked him and carried the unexpected delivery to my apartment, curious about its origin. Inside the sleek space that balanced minimalist design with comfortable functionality, I opened the package to find a small velvet box containing an object I immediately recognized: my mother's sterling silver bookmark, engraved with a quote from Amelia Earhart. "The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity." A handwritten note accompanied it. "This always reminded me more of you than me. Maybe it should have been yours all along. Marcus." The bookmark had been a contentious item in our childhood, ostensibly belonging to my mother but frequently borrowed by me for my constant reading. Marcus had claimed it after I left for community college, despite rarely opening books that weren't explicitly required for courses. The gesture of returning it now, accompanied by acknowledgement that it aligned with my character rather than his, represented a small but meaningful rupture in our family's persistent pattern of entitlement. Distribution. I ran my finger over the engraved quote, reflecting on how accurately it described the path that had led to Nexus. The decision to leave my secure marketing position to build something unproven had indeed been the most difficult step. Everything, since the 18-hour workdays, the rejection from initial investors, the technical challenges and market education, had been manifestations of tenacity rather than separate decisions. The bookmark represented something beyond its material value or sentimental association. It symbolized Marcus's first acknowledgement, however small, that our family's distribution of resources and recognition had not always aligned with our respective characters or contributions. As I prepared for bed that night, I placed the bookmark on my nightstand beside current reading materials, technical documentation for our upcoming platform enhancement, and market analysis of potential expansion territories. These represented the present focus of my attention, but the bookmark connected that present to a past that had shaped without defining me. My college fund had been redirected to Marcus 12 years ago based on family assumptions about potential and priority. That decision had closed one path while inadvertently opening another, forcing me to find alternative routes to education and opportunity that ultimately led to founding Nexus, rather than following a more conventional career trajectory. The loss of promised support had taught me self-reliance. The experience of having merit overlooked had committed me to building a company where contribution determined recognition. The painful lesson of conditional family support had inspired creation of a professional environment where performance rather than preference determined advancement. Marcus's visit to my office had brought this journey full circle. The brother, who had benefited from family favoritism, now seeking opportunity from the sister who had succeeded despite its absence. The encounter had forced both of us to confront the consequences of our family's choices and our own responses to them. For Marcus, that meant recognizing the limitations of charm and entitlement in a meritocratic environment. For me, it meant acknowledging that maintaining principles mattered more than resolving family tensions through compromise. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected on the journey ahead. Not just Nexus's continued growth and evolution, but the potential transformation in my relationship with Marcus and my parents. True reconciliation wouldn't come through pretending past inequities hadn't occurred or hadn't mattered. It would require honest acknowledgement of those patterns and conscious commitment to different principles moving forward. The silver bookmark caught the dim light from my bedside lamp. The engraved quote, a reminder that decisive action followed by persistent execution had created everything valuable in my professional life. That same combination, clear decision followed by unwavering implementation, would be necessary to transform personal relationships that had been shaped by long-standing patterns of recognition and entitlement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. At Nexus, technical problems to solve, strategic decisions to make, team members to support in their professional development. But it would also bring opportunity to continue building something beyond the company itself, a life defined by principles rather than circumstances, by choices rather than history. The decision to redirect my college fund to Marcus had been made for me, closing doors I had planned to enter. Every significant decision since, from community college enrollment through founding Nexus to maintaining hiring standards even for family, had been mine alone, opening doors I hadn't initially imagined existed. That contrast defined the fundamental difference between our paths. Marcus had received opportunity through family provision, while I had created opportunity through personal determination. His visit to my office represented the point where those divergent trajectories had finally intersected, where provision without accountability met achievement through adversity. What happened next would depend on choices we both made, whether Marcus could evolve beyond entitlement toward earned contribution, whether I could maintain principles while allowing space for genuine growth and reconciliation. The silver bookmark suggested possibility that such evolution had already begun in small but meaningful ways. With that hopeful thought, I turned off the lamp and allowed sleep to come, knowing tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build the future I envisioned, not just for Nexus, but for all relationships in my life. Thursday evening arrived with unexpected nervousness. I found myself changing outfits twice before settling on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, professional enough to maintain boundaries, but casual enough to signal this wasn't a business meeting. The restaurant Marcus had selected was a neutral territory, an upscale Mediterranean place equidistant between my office and his apartment. Neither a power venue where business deals were brokered, nor a familiar family haunt laden with shared history. My driver pulled up to the entrance precisely at 7:00 p.m. "I'll wait nearby, Ms. Reeves," he offered, familiar with my preference for transportation flexibility during meetings with uncertain duration. "Thanks, Devin. I'll text when I'm ready," I replied, appreciating his consistent reliability, a quality I valued highly in both professional and personal contexts. Marcus was already seated at a corner table, studying the wine list with the focused attention he typically reserved for situations where demonstrating expertise offered social currency. He stood as I approached, greeting me with an awkward half-hug that embodied our current relationship status, neither the easy familiarity of close siblings nor the formal distance of business acquaintances. "You look well," he offered as we both settled into our seats. "Though I guess running a multi-million-dollar company agrees with you." The comment hovered somewhere between genuine compliment and defensive deflection. I chose to interpret it positively rather than parsing subtext. "Building something meaningful is fulfilling," I replied simply. "How have you been since Monday?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood, typically preceding rare moments of genuine vulnerability. "Honestly? Processing. Lots of processing." The server approached before he could elaborate, presenting the wine list with practiced deference. Marcus glanced at me with unusual hesitation. "Would you prefer to choose? You probably know more about this than I do." The small acknowledgement of my expertise, trivial though it might seem in context of wine selection, represented deviation from our established pattern where Marcus automatically assumed authority in social situations regardless of relevant knowledge. "I'm familiar with their list," I confirmed, selecting a balanced Sangiovese that would complement most menu options without overwhelming the conversation with excessive cost or pretension. After placing our order, I returned focus to Marcus's earlier comment. "Processing what, specifically?" He studied the breadbasket with uncharacteristic intensity. "A lot of things. Our conversation at your office, my career trajectory, some family history I've been reconsidering." "Reconsidering how?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than leading. Whatever reflections had prompted his request for dinner deserved space to unfold at their own pace. "I found my Stanford acceptance package yesterday while looking for some tax documents," he began, seemingly switching topics. "Remember how big a deal that was? Mom and Dad took us all out to that fancy dinner where Dad ordered champagne even though I was technically underage." I remembered the celebration well, my parents' effusive pride, the expensive restaurant, my brother's triumphant expression as congratulations flowed from extended family members. My own acceptance to MIT just weeks earlier had been acknowledged, with modest praise and practical discussions about financial aid packages. It was a significant achievement, I acknowledged. Stanford MBA programs are highly selective. "That's just it," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. Looking at those acceptance materials again, I realized something I never processed before. I barely got in, Alexandra. My GPA was below their typical threshold. My test scores were decent, but not exceptional. What got me in was Dad's alumni connection and my personal statement, which Mom helped me rewrite 5 times. He paused as our wine arrived, waiting until the server departed before continuing. "Meanwhile, you were accepted to MIT's computer science program with a partial merit scholarship despite attending community college. No legacy connections, no parental editing of your application, just raw academic performance." The observation hovered between us, its implications expanding into the space his words had created. Marcus had begun the process of reassessing our family's mythology, the persistent narrative of his exceptional promise juxtaposed against my practical competence. "Why does that matter now?" I asked, neither confirming nor disputing his assessment. "Those decisions were made years ago." "Because I'm trying to understand how we got here," he replied, gesturing vaguely to encompass our current circumstances. His stalled career contrasted with my evident success. "And I think it starts with a pattern that was established long before college." He took a slow sip of wine, gathering thoughts. "When I showed up at your office on Monday, I genuinely expected you'd create a position for me. Not out of charity, but because that's how things have always worked in our family. opportunities materializing for me based on potential rather than proven results. The frank acknowledgement of this pattern, something I had observed but never expected him to recognize, caught me slightly off guard. I maintained neutral expression while allowing him space to continue. "Your HR person, Natalie?" She asked me questions I couldn't actually answer during that phone screening. Specific examples of initiatives I'd led from concept through implementation. Measurable outcomes I'd personally delivered. Situations where I'd taken accountability for results rather than just participation in processes. He shook his head slightly, rueful recognition in his expression. "I've spent 12 years in business without developing clear answers to those questions. That's sobering to realize." Our server returned to take our dinner orders. The brief interruption provided natural pause in a conversation developing emotional complexity beyond what I had anticipated. Marcus selected grilled octopus followed by lamb tagine. I chose fattoush salad and branzino, both of us navigating the menu with the automatic confidence of people accustomed to business dinners in upscale restaurants. Once alone again, I considered how to respond to his unexpected self-assessment. "What prompted this reflection?" I asked finally. "Beyond our meeting on Monday." "Catherine Zhang," he answered, surprising me further. "I reached out to her yesterday, not about a job," he added quickly, apparently reading concern in my expression. "I wanted perspective from someone who knows both the investment landscape and you professionally." The initiative to seek external perspective, particularly from someone clearly allied with my professional interests, represented significant departure from Marcus's typical approach of leveraging family connection or social charm to achieve desired outcomes. "What insight did she offer?" I asked, genuinely curious about Catherine's perspective delivered without my presence. "She asked questions rather than offering opinions," Marcus replied. "About my understanding of Nexus's business model, about what specific value I believed I could contribute, about whether I'd applied the same rigorous standards to my own career progression that you've applied to building your company." He adjusted his silverware with unnecessary precision. Questions I couldn't answer convincingly, even to myself. That's when I started really examining the difference between our paths. Our appetizers arrived, providing momentary focus on food rather than conversation. After several bites, Marcus continued, his tone more measured than I typically associated with him. "I've been coasting on early advantages without developing substantive expertise," he said, the self-assessment delivered with surprising clarity. "Meanwhile, you've been building genuine capability despite early disadvantages. The results speak for themselves." The acknowledgement, unqualified and direct, represented perhaps the most honest assessment of our divergent trajectories I had ever heard from anyone in my family. It deserved reciprocal honesty rather than easy comfort or polite minimization. I never framed it quite that explicitly to myself, I admitted. But yes, that's a fair characterization of our different paths. "Why didn't you ever confront me about the college fund?" he asked suddenly. "About benefiting from money that was intended for your education?" The question addressed the unspoken center of our complicated relationship, the moment when favoritism had transformed from subtle preference into material consequence with life-altering implications. "What would confrontation have accomplished?" I asked in return. "You didn't make the decision to redirect my college fund to your MBA. Once our parents made that choice, your accepting the benefit was predictable. The more relevant question is whether you would have made the same decision in their position." Marcus considered this reframing. "I honestly don't know," he admitted after a thoughtful pause. "I'd like to think I wouldn't have taken from one child to give to another. But I've never faced that kind of choice, and at 22, I wasn't questioning parental decisions that benefited me." His candor suggested capacity for self-reflection I hadn't previously recognized in him. I nodded acknowledgement without pressing further, allowing space for our main courses to arrive as natural transition in the conversation. As we began our entrees, Marcus shifted focus slightly. Tell me something honestly. When you refused to create a position for me at Nexus, was any part of that decision influenced by what happened with the college fund? The question deserved careful consideration rather than reflexive denial. I took a moment to examine my motivations with genuine introspection before responding. Not consciously, I answered finally. The standards we maintain at Nexus were established based on what builds sustainable success, not personal history. But perhaps those standards themselves were shaped by my experience of seeing opportunity distributed based on preference rather than performance. I wanted to create an environment where that pattern couldn't repeat. I met his gaze directly. If you had demonstrated the specific expertise Nexus needs at leadership levels, your relationship to me wouldn't have disqualified you. But it also wouldn't have entitled you to special consideration. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing this perspective. That's fair. More than fair, actually. He took a thoughtful bite of his lamb before continuing. You know what I realized this week? I've never actually built anything lasting. I've occupied roles, collected titles, but haven't created anything that would exist without me. The observation contained genuine vulnerability, acknowledgement of the substantive difference between our professional trajectories beyond surface metrics of salary or status. I recognized the courage such admission required from someone whose identity had been constructed around assumed exceptionalism rather than demonstrated creation. Building something from nothing is a specific skill set, I offered, different from navigating existing structures or managing established processes. Neither approach is inherently superior, but they require different capabilities and produce different results. Your approach produces companies valued at $12 million after 4 years, Marcus noted with wry smile. Mine produces resumes full of impressive-sounding titles disconnected from measurable outcomes. The results do suggest certain superiority. I shook my head slightly. Success metrics depend on objectives. If your goal was stable employment, with progressively increasing compensation and title advancement, you've achieved that consistently. The fact that my objectives centered around creating autonomous value doesn't invalidate your different priorities. This framing, acknowledging different approaches without automatic hierarchy, seemed to surprise him. Marcus studied me with newfound curiosity. When did you get so diplomatic? I remember a much more absolutist little sister. Managing 75 people with diverse perspectives and working with investors who control millions in capital tends to develop diplomatic skills, I replied with small smile. Effective leadership requires balancing clarity of vision with openness to alternative viewpoints. He nodded, conceding the point. Speaking of investors, Catherine mentioned something interesting yesterday. She said you've turned down multiple acquisition offers, including one that would have valued Nexus at significantly more than your current $12 million valuation. Why keep building rather than cash out? The question revealed genuine interest in my decision-making rather than superficial curiosity about financial details. It deserved substantive response. Nexus solves meaningful problems for businesses that are typically overlooked by enterprise software companies, I explained. We help small manufacturers and distributors compete effectively against larger corporations by optimizing their supply chains and reducing operational inefficiencies. That impact matters more to me than maximizing personal financial return through early acquisition. I continued, articulating the purpose that guided decisions beyond profit maximization. When I founded Nexus, my goal wasn't creating wealth, transfer to myself. It was building something with lasting value for our clients, team members, and eventually the broader market. That purpose hasn't been fulfilled yet, so acquisition doesn't align with our mission regardless of valuation. Marcus considered this perspective with unexpected thoughtfulness. Purpose beyond personal benefit, he mused. I'm not sure I've ever made a career decision based on anything except compensation package and title advancement. It's never too late to incorporate broader purpose into professional choices, I observed. Many successful people pivot toward impact-focused work after achieving financial stability. Is that what you're offering? He asked directly. A chance to pivot toward purpose through some role at Nexus? I appreciated his directness, but maintained equal clarity in response. I'm offering honest perspective on different approaches to career development. Nexus hires based on demonstrated expertise and cultural alignment, regardless of personal connection. If your path eventually develops capabilities we need, that would be evaluated on standard criteria like any candidate. Marcus nodded, accepting this boundary without the defensive pushback I might have expected based on our history. Fair enough. I need to earn my way rather than expecting connection to create opportunity. That's actually refreshing clarity compared to most professional environments I've experienced. As we finished our main courses, conversation shifted toward more neutral territory. Industry trends, mutual acquaintances from college, recollections of less contentious childhood experiences. The interaction had evolved beyond both the entitlement that had characterized his initial approach to Nexus and the defensive protection I had maintained since learning of his interest in joining my company. When dessert menus appeared, Marcus waved them away with uncharacteristic decisiveness. Actually, I brought something instead of dessert. With your permission? At my curious nod, he retrieved a slim folder from his briefcase. I've been thinking about what you said regarding demonstrated expertise versus theoretical potential. About earning opportunity rather than expecting it based on connection. He placed the folder on the table between us. This isn't a revised resume or another attempt at getting you to create a position for me. It's something more fundamental. I opened the folder to find a detailed personal development plan, a structured framework outlining specific skills Marcus intended to develop, experiences he planned to pursue, and measurable outcomes he would track to demonstrate progress. The document reflected serious thought rather than hastily assembled performance for my benefit. I realized I've spent my career advancing without developing, he explained as I reviewed his plan, moving between roles and companies whenever expectations for measurable results began to solidify. That pattern worked until I encountered an environment like Nexus where actual capability matters more than credential or confidence. He gestured toward the document. This is my commitment to changing that pattern, to building genuine expertise rather than managing perception. I'm not sharing it to impress you or to secure promises about future opportunities at Nexus. I'm sharing it because your perspective helped clarify what's been missing in my professional development, and I value your feedback on this corrective approach. The initiative represented significant evolution from our interaction just days earlier, a shift from entitled expectation to ownership of personal development. It deserved thoughtful response rather than casual encouragement or skeptical dismissal. This demonstrates self-awareness and structured thinking I haven't previously associated with your approach, I acknowledged, paging through his detailed action items and accountability metrics. Particularly the emphasis on completing full project cycles rather than transitioning during implementation phases. Marcus nodded. That pattern became embarrassingly obvious once I started honestly examining my career trajectory. I've consistently avoided the accountability phase of initiatives I've helped launch. This plan intentionally requires measuring and owning outcomes, not just contributing to processes. As I continued reviewing the document, a specific section caught my attention: a 3-month pro bono consulting commitment to a small manufacturing cooperative struggling with supply chain inefficiencies. The project description included clear deliverables, specific expertise Marcus would need to develop, and metrics for measuring impact on the cooperative's operations. This commitment is particularly interesting, I noted, tapping that section. What prompted this specific focus? 2 realizations, he replied. First, I need practical experience with the actual problems Nexus solves. Not theoretical understanding, but hands-on engagement with supply chain challenges facing small businesses. Second, I need to demonstrate capability through measurable impact rather than impressive association. He gestured toward the document. The cooperative needs help they can't afford at market rates. I need experience more valuable than immediate compensation. The arrangement creates mutual benefit while producing documented results that either validate or invalidate my potential in this domain. The approach reflected maturity and strategic thinking I hadn't previously witnessed in Marcus's professional decisions. It suggested capacity for growth beyond the entitled expectation that had characterized his initial approach to Nexus. "This is thoughtfully constructed," I acknowledged, closing the folder and returning it to him. "Implementation will be challenging, particularly the aspects requiring vulnerability and accountability for measurable outcomes. But the framework itself demonstrates meaningful reflection." "I'm not expecting immediate transformation," Marcus clarified, "or assuming this automatically creates future opportunity at Nexus. I'm simply committed to developing actual expertise rather than continuing to advance based on presentation and perception." As the server cleared our plates and brought the check, Marcus reached for it with practiced automaticity before catching himself. "Sorry, force of habit. Would you prefer to split this?" The small moment reflected larger recalibration occurring. In our interaction, conscious examination of patterns previously executed without awareness. I appreciated the recognition even as I shook my head slightly. "I invited you to dinner to discuss matters of consequence. I'm comfortable covering the check," I replied, not as power move, but as simple acknowledgement of my current financial reality relative to his. As we prepared to depart the restaurant, Marcus paused before standing. "Thank you for being direct with me on Monday, and for being willing to have this conversation tonight." Both represented more respect than falling back on family connection to create opportunity I hadn't earned. The gratitude seemed genuine rather than strategic, acknowledgement that maintaining principles had ultimately offered more dignity than compromising standards would have provided. I nodded acceptance without diminishing the significance of his recognition. Outside the restaurant, Marcus extended his hand formally rather than defaulting to obligatory sibling embrace. "I appreciate your time this evening and your perspective on my development plan." I shook his hand, acknowledging the intentional shift toward adult interaction based on mutual respect rather than inherited familiarity. "Your willingness to examine patterns and initiate change is meaningful. I'm curious to see how your plan develops in practice." As Devin pulled up in my car, Marcus stepped back with final observation. "You know, when I came to your office on Monday, I thought I was offering you opportunity to help family. I didn't understand that you've spent your entire career succeeding despite family dynamics rather than because of them. That recognition changes everything about how I see our history and our potential future relationship." The insight reflected deeper understanding than I had previously credited him with capacity to develop. I nodded acknowledgement without overextending the moment with excessive analysis or premature promises of transformed sibling dynamics. "Good night, Marcus. Let me know how the cooperative project develops." As Devin navigated evening traffic toward my apartment, I reflected on the unexpected evolution our relationship had undergone in just 4 days, from Marcus's entitled expectation of executive position based on family connection to his thoughtful commitment to personal development based on demonstrated capability. Whether this transformation would sustain beyond initial recognition remained uncertain. Patterns established over decades don't typically yield to permanent change through single conversations, regardless of their apparent depth or sincerity. But the willingness to examine those patterns represented meaningful first step toward potentially healthier dynamics, both professionally and personally. My phone buzzed with text from Catherine. "How was dinner with your brother? Any insights?" "Worth sharing." Her interest reflected appropriate balance between professional oversight regarding potential Nexus leadership implications and personal support for complicated family dynamics, intersecting with business decisions. I appreciated both dimensions of her engagement. Surprisingly productive, I replied. Marcus is beginning to recognize the difference between advancement based on presentation versus achievement based on contribution. Time will tell whether that recognition translates to sustained development. Catherine's response came quickly. Transformation requires both insight and implementation. The former without the latter remains merely interesting conversation. The observation captured essential wisdom regarding the gap between recognition and actual change, understanding patterns intellectually versus developing different behaviors practically. Marcus had demonstrated unexpected capacity for the first. The second would require consistent effort against established habits and environmental reinforcement. As my car arrived at my building, I noticed email notification from my mother. Haven't heard from either of you about dinner. Everything okay? Still hoping for family gathering this weekend to discuss Marcus joining Nexus. The message highlighted persistent disconnect between my parents' expectations and current reality, the assumption that family discussion would naturally precede professional standards in determining Marcus's potential employment. That gap would require additional honest conversation beyond tonight's dinner with my brother. For now, I simply replied, Marcus and I had productive discussion about professional development opportunities. We'll touch base about weekend plans tomorrow. The deliberately vague response provided necessary space for Marcus to process our conversation without immediate parental pressure to deliver specific outcomes or commitments. Whatever evolution might develop in our sibling relationship deserved protection from the family dynamics that had shaped our divergent paths from childhood forward. As I prepared for bed that evening, I found myself reflecting on the invisible building I had done not just in creating Nexus, but in constructing an identity and purpose independent from the expectations and assumptions that had defined my family role from earliest memory. The company valued at $12 million represented visible evidence of that construction, tangible manifestation of vision executed through persistent effort despite initial limitations. But equally significant was the invisible foundation I had built. The confidence to maintain standards despite familial pressure, the clarity to evaluate contribution based on demonstration rather than potential, the courage to create opportunities through initiative rather than inheritance. That invisible foundation had made Monday's honest conversation with Marcus possible. It had supported Thursday's surprisingly productive dinner discussion. It would sustain whatever complex interactions the future held with both my brother and my parents as family dynamics continued evolving in response to our changing professional realities. Marcus had begun recognizing what I had understood for years, that lasting achievement requires building substance beneath surface appearance, that genuine capability matters more than confident presentation, that meaningful opportunity emerges from demonstrated contribution rather than inherited connection. Whether that recognition would transform his professional approach remained uncertain. But the possibility existed, not because of family obligation or sibling loyalty, but because he had demonstrated capacity for self-reflection and structured development I hadn't previously witnessed in him. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself cautiously optimistic about this potential evolution in our relationship. Not naive expectation of instant transformation, but reasonable hope for gradual development of mutual respect based on authentic recognition, rather than obligatory familiarity. The journey ahead would undoubtedly include complications and setbacks, as long-standing patterns reasserted themselves against conscious efforts toward change. But tonight's conversation had created foundation for something previously absent from our adult relationship. Genuine possibility for connection based on mutual respect rather than inherited hierarchy or familial expectation. That foundation, invisible though it might be to external observation, represented meaningful construction in its own right. Sunday brunch at my parents' home had been a monthly tradition since I moved back to San Francisco, though my attendance had become increasingly sporadic as Nexus demanded more of my time. This particular Sunday, however, I made a point of arriving precisely on time, knowing the conversation ahead required careful navigation. My mother greeted me at the door with the enthusiastic embrace she reserved for family gatherings, her perfume instantly transporting me to childhood memories. "Alexandra, we were starting to think you wouldn't make it. Your father's just finishing the frittata." The house remained largely unchanged from my youth, a comfortable 4-bedroom in a respectable neighborhood that had appreciated substantially in value over the 30 years my parents had owned. Family photos lined the entryway, chronicling our development from gap-toothed children to college graduates. I noticed, not for the first time, the subtle imbalance in representation. Marcus's academic achievements and sports victories prominently displayed, my accomplishments more selectively curated. "Is Marcus joining us?" I asked, following my mother into the kitchen where my father stood at the stove, spatula in hand. "He texted that he's running about 15 minutes late," my father replied, glancing up from his culinary focus. "Something about finalizing some documents for a new project." The specificity of his excuse suggested Marcus had shared details of his development plan with our parents, an unexpected initiative given his typical pattern of information control within family dynamics. "New project?" I inquired, accepting the coffee my mother offered with grateful nod. "Some pro bono work with a manufacturing group," my mother explained, her tone reflecting mixture of confusion and cautious approval. "He was quite enthusiastic about it when he called yesterday, though I'm not entirely clear on how it benefits his career." The observation highlighted my mother's persistent framework for evaluating professional choices, immediate advancement rather than skill development or broader purpose. It was the same perspective that had informed their decision about my college fund years earlier, calculating return on investment in terms of conventional success metrics rather than personal growth or intrinsic value. "Professional development takes many forms," I noted neutrally, helping my mother arrange place settings at the dining table. "Direct compensation isn't always the primary benefit." My father transferred the completed frittata from skillet to serving platter with practiced care. "That's what Marcus said, almost verbatim. Mentioned something about developing expertise through application rather than association." He glanced at me with shrewd assessment. "Sounds like your influence." Before I could formulate response, the front door opened, announcing Marcus's arrival. He entered the kitchen with energy that seemed simultaneously familiar and altered, his characteristic confidence tempered with something approaching purposeful focus. "Sorry I'm late," he offered, kissing our mother's cheek before nodding greeting to our father and me. "Had to finalize project parameters with the cooperative's leadership team. Their production scheduler was only available this morning." The specificity of his explanation, practical details rather than important-sounding generalities, represented subtle shift from his typical communication style within family contexts. I noted the change without commenting directly, curious whether our parents would register the difference. "Well, you're here now," my mother smiled indulgently. "And just in time. Everything's ready." As we settled around the dining table with my father's frittata, my mother's fruit salad, and fresh bagels from the neighborhood bakery, conversation initially followed familiar patterns: neighborhood updates, distant relatives' activities, mild gossip about family friends. The comfortable banality served its purpose, easing us into physical proximity before addressing the underlying tension that had prompted this particular gathering. Predictably, my mother initiated the transition. "So," she began as we finished, "our initial servings. We've been eager to hear about how things are progressing with Marcus joining Nexus. You've both been surprisingly quiet about details." The phrasing embedded multiple assumptions: that Marcus's employment at Nexus was proceeding rather than rejected, that details rather than fundamental direction remained to be determined, that our surprising quiet reflected planning rather. then fundamental reconsideration of premises. Actually, Mom, Marcus responded before I could formulate diplomatic reply, I'm not joining Nexus at this point. The simple declaration created a moment of stunned silence. My mother's expression shifted from anticipatory to confused. My father paused with coffee cup halfway to his lips, watching Marcus with reassessment. What do you mean, at this point? My mother asked, recovering quickly. I thought that was the whole purpose of your meeting with Alexandra last week. The purpose was exploring potential fit between my experience and Nexus's needs, Marcus clarified. After thorough discussion, we determined that fit doesn't currently exist. His framing, we determined rather than Alexandra decided, represented meaningful shift from how he might have characterized the situation even a week earlier. The accountability distribution acknowledged mutual assessment rather than unilateral rejection. I don't understand, my mother persisted, looking between us with increasing distress. Alexandra, surely there's some position at your company that would be appropriate for your brother. He has an MBA from Stanford, for goodness. Sake. The appeal highlighted persistent disconnect between how my parents evaluated professional value, credentials, and potential, versus how I had built Nexus, demonstrated capability and specific expertise. It deserved clarification rather than confrontation. Nexus hires based on demonstrated skills directly relevant to our specific business needs, I explained calmly. Educational credentials are considered alongside practical experience and verified results. We maintain these standards for all candidates, regardless of personal connection. My father's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. That's uncommonly principled in today's business environment, he observed, studying me with newly evaluative gaze. Most companies I've known operate with more flexible standards when family's involved. Nepotism undermines organizational culture, I replied simply. Team members who earn their positions through demonstrated capability justifiably resent colleagues who secure roles through connection rather than contribution. Marcus nodded agreement, surprising me with his supportive interjection. Alexandra's right. Nexus has built something remarkable specifically because they maintain consistent standards. Compromising those standards to accommodate family would damage what makes the company valuable in the first place. His articulation of this principle, one he had initially resisted when seeking executive position based primarily on our relationship, suggested genuine evolution in his perspective, rather than strategic performance for my benefit. The development was as unexpected as it was encouraging. My mother appeared increasingly distressed by this united front. But your family, she protested, as if stating an obvious truth that invalidated all other considerations. Family supports. Each other creates opportunities for each other. That's what families do. There are multiple ways to support family beyond employment, I noted carefully. Marcus and I are exploring more productive approaches to mutual support than compromising business standards. What does that mean in practice? My father asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Marcus answered, before I could formulate response. It means Alexandra has provided honest assessment of where gaps exist between my current capabilities and what would make me valuable to an organization like Nexus. And I've developed a structured plan to address those gaps through targeted skill development and measurable results rather than expecting position based on relationship. He retrieved a folder from his messenger bag, a refined version of the development plan he had shared during our dinner. This outlines specific expertise I'm building through practical application rather than theoretical credentials. Starting with pro bono consulting for a manufacturing cooperative facing supply chain challenges similar to those Nexus helps clients solve. My father accepted the document with evident interest, studying its contents with the focused attention I remembered. From childhood reviews of school projects, my mother's expression remained troubled, suggesting deeper concerns than professional development strategies. I just don't understand why Alexandra couldn't create appropriate position while you develop these skills, she persisted, the slight hesitation before skills, revealing persistent skepticism about competency-based evaluation versus credential-based advancement. Because that would undermine everything Nexus represents, Marcus replied with surprising directness. And frankly, it wouldn't serve my development either. I need to build genuine capability, not occupy position created through connection rather than qualification. The maturity of this perspective, prioritizing authentic development over superficial advancement, represented significant evolution from the Marcus who had arrived at my office expecting executive role based primarily on family relationship. Whether that evolution would sustain beyond initial recognition remained uncertain, but its emergence deserved acknowledgement. That's uncommonly self-aware, my father observed, looking up from Marcus's development plan with newfound respect. Most people prefer comfortable illusions about their capabilities rather than honest assessment of development needs. I've had excellent role model for prioritizing substance over appearance, Marcus replied, nodding slightly in my direction. Alexandra has built something remarkable precisely because she focuses on creating actual value rather than managing perceptions of value. The acknowledgement, public and unqualified, created momentary silence around the table. Coming from the brother who had benefited from family favoritism throughout our shared childhood, the recognition carried particular weight that none of us quite knew how to address directly. My mother recovered first, though her response suggested continued misalignment with the principles under discussion. Well, I'm sure Alexandra will reconsider once you've completed some of these development activities. Family businesses thrive when family members support each other's advancement. Mom, I interjected gently but firmly, Nexus isn't a family business. It's a company I founded and built with a team of professionals selected for their specific expertise and demonstrated capability. Any future consideration of Marcus joining our team would follow the same evaluation standards we apply to all candidates. The clarification seemed to genuinely startle her. But you created it. Doesn't that make it a family enterprise by definition? Her question revealed fundamental misconception about Nexus's origins and structure, one I had apparently failed to correct effectively despite years of consistent messaging about the company's independent development. I founded Nexus with personal savings and initial angel investment, I explained with deliberate patience. Our subsequent growth has been funded through venture capital based on demonstrated traction and measurable results. The company's ownership is distributed across multiple stakeholders, including our investment partners and employee equity participants. My family has never provided financial support, strategic guidance, or operational involvement in Nexus's development. The explicit articulation of these facts, clear delineation between family connection and company creation, visibly impacted both my parents. My father's expression shifted toward thoughtful reassessment. My mother appeared genuinely distressed by this characterization. But we've always supported your endeavors, she protested. We've been proud of your achievements, celebrated your success. Emotional support is meaningful, I acknowledged, and I appreciate recognition of Nexus's growth. But there's important distinction between celebrating success and contributing to its development. Nexus exists because of specific expertise, strategic vision, and relentless execution by our team, not because of family connection or inherited advantage. Marcus nodded agreement. That's what makes Alexandra's achievement so remarkable, Mom. She built something substantial without leveraging family resources or connections. Just raw talent, specific expertise, and exceptional determination. That's significantly more impressive than conventional family business succession or nepotistic advancement. His assessment, Accurate but unexpected from the brother who had initially approached Nexus, assuming family connection entitled him to executive position, suggested genuine recalibration of perspective rather than strategic performance for my benefit. My father studied us both with evaluative attention. "You've come to some sort of understanding beyond just employment considerations," he observed. "Something more fundamental about your relationship as adults rather than siblings, defined by family dynamics." The perception was surprisingly insightful for a man who had historically demonstrated limited awareness of subtextual currents in family interactions. It deserved confirmation rather than deflection. "We've begun more honest conversation about our different paths and how family patterns have influenced our respective development," I confirmed. Marcus has demonstrated unexpected capacity for self-reflection and growth mindset regarding professional capabilities. And Alexandra has shown remarkable restraint in not holding justified resentment about past family decisions that privileged my opportunities over hers, Marcus added, including the college fund reallocation that financed my MBA while requiring her to create alternative educational path. The explicit reference to this pivotal episode, naming directly what had previously existed as unacknowledged subtext in family discussions, created palpable tension around the table. My mother's expression registered alarm at this boundary violation. My father's face reflected uncomfortable recognition of history being directly addressed rather than tactfully avoided. That was a family decision made under specific financial constraints, my mother responded defensively. We believed at the time that supporting Marcus's MBA offered better return on limited resources than dividing funds inadequately between two educational investments. The rationalization, consistent with how the decision had been framed when originally communicated, highlighted persistent misalignment between how my parents evaluated investment versus how outcomes had actually manifested. It deserved factual response rather than emotional reaction. The decision redirected funds specifically saved for my education toward Marcus's graduate degree despite my stronger academic record and demonstrated commitment, I stated neutrally. The outcome speaks for itself. Marcus secured MBA that provided credential without developing specific expertise, while I created alternative educational path that built practical capabilities central to founding and scaling Nexus. My father winced slightly at this objective assessment. When presented in those terms, the decision appears questionable at best, he acknowledged, surprising me with his willingness to reconsider long-established family narrative. Particularly given your respective professional trajectories since then. Hindsight offers clarity often unavailable during decision moments, I offered, neither absolving nor condemning the choice that had significantly altered my life trajectory. The relevant question isn't whether that specific decision was optimal, but whether we can establish healthier patterns moving forward based on recognition of each person's demonstrated capabilities rather than assigned roles or presumed potential. Marcus nodded agreement. That's precisely what Alexandra has helped me recognize about my own professional development. I've advanced based on perception management rather than capability building, moving between roles whenever accountability for results began solidifying, leveraging credential and confidence rather than developing specific expertise. The self-assessment, direct and unsparing, visibly startled our parents. This version of Marcus, capable of honest self-evaluation without defensive justification, represented significant departure from the son they had consistently positioned as inherently exceptional regardless of measurable achievement. That seems unnecessarily harsh self-criticism, my mother protested. You've always had tremendous potential, Marcus. Everyone who knows you recognizes your natural leadership qualities. Potential without development yields limited results, Mom, he replied with gentle firmness. I'm finally recognizing what Alexandra understood years ago, that genuine capability matters more than confident presentation, that measurable contribution creates more value than credentialed association. The maturity of this perspective, prioritizing substance over appearance, accountability over advancement, reflected evolution I wouldn't have predicted possible even weeks earlier. Whether this development would sustain beyond initial recognition remained uncertain, but its emergence deserved acknowledgement. This new direction is unexpected, my father observed, studying Marcus with reassessment, but potentially more substantive than your previous professional approach. It's directly inspired by Alexandra's example, Marcus acknowledged without hesitation. She's built something meaningful through specific expertise and measurable contribution rather than credential leverage or relationship management. That foundation creates sustainable value in ways my career trajectory hasn't. The acknowledgement, public and unqualified, created another moment of thoughtful silence. Around the table, coming from the brother who had historically occupied center position in family attention and investment distribution, this recognition carried weight that none of us quite knew how to address directly. My mother shifted uncomfortably, clearly, struggling to integrate this recalibrated dynamic into her established understanding of our respective positions within family hierarchy. Well, I'm sure you'll both continue supporting each other's success in whatever forms make sense, she offered finally. Retreat to platitude signaling her discomfort with evolving sibling relationship outside her direct influence. That's precisely what we're establishing, I confirmed. Authentic support based on honest assessment rather than obligatory connection or inherited expectation. As brunch concluded and conversation shifted toward less consequential topics, I observed subtle but meaningful change in how my parents engaged with both Marcus and me. Less automatic deference to his perspectives, more substantive interest in my professional insights. Whether this recalibration would sustain beyond initial adjustment remained uncertain, but its emergence suggested possibility for healthier family dynamics moving forward. When I prepared to depart following coffee and my mother's signature apple tart, Marcus walked me to my car rather than remaining with our parents as typically occurred during family gatherings. The small deviation from established pattern reflected intentional creation of space for sibling interaction, independent from parental observation or influence. Thank you for your support in there, I acknowledged as we reached my vehicle. Particularly regarding clarification about Nexus's hiring standards and ownership structure. Marcus nodded, hands in pockets as he considered his response. I've been thinking about something you said during our dinner, about building rather than navigating, creating rather than managing. The distinction feels increasingly significant as I reassess my professional direction. Different approaches yield different results, I observed. Neither inherently superior, but producing fundamentally different outcomes over time. Your approach produced $12 million company built from nothing, he noted with wry smile. Mine produced impressive-sounding resume with limited substantive expertise. The results suggest certain advantages to your methodology. The self-assessment, delivered without defensive qualification or implied request for contradiction, represented meaningful evolution in how Marcus evaluated his professional development relative to mine. It deserved acknowledgement without unnecessary expansion. Different objectives produce different outcomes, I replied simply. Your clarity about development priorities now suggests capacity for significant growth moving forward. He nodded, accepting this assessment without pressing for more effusive encouragement or validation, another small indication of maturity previously absent from our interactions. I'll keep you updated on the cooperative project, he offered as I unlocked my car. Not as performative demonstration or bid for reconsideration at Nexus, but as professional courtesy between colleagues pursuing parallel development in adjacent domains. The framing, colleagues rather than siblings, parallel development rather than competitive comparison, suggested healthier foundation for our relationship, moving forward than historical patterns had established. Whether this evolution would sustain beyond initial recalibration remained uncertain, but its emergence created possibility previously absent from our adult interactions. "I'd appreciate that," I replied sincerely. "And I'm available if you encounter challenges requiring perspective from someone familiar with supply chain optimization for small-scale operations." As I drove away from my parents' home, I reflected on the subtle but significant shifts that had emerged during brunch, not just in Marcus's self-perception and articulated priorities, but in our parents' engagement with both of us. The family dynamic that had consistently positioned him as inherently exceptional, regardless of measurable achievement, while framing my contributions as practical rather than visionary, had begun showing signs of recalibration based on demonstrated results, rather than assigned roles. Whether these adjustments would sustain beyond initial recognition remained uncertain. Family patterns established over decades typically resist permanent transformation through isolated conversations, regardless of their apparent depth or impact. But the willingness to acknowledge alternative perspectives suggested capacity for growth previously unclear from our collective interactions. My phone rang through the car's speaker system. Catherine Zhang calling rather than texting, suggesting matter requiring voice conversation rather than text exchange. "Alexandra," she greeted when I accepted the call. "Hope I'm not interrupting?" "Your Sunday." "Just leaving family brunch," I replied. "Everything all right?" "More than all right," she confirmed, characteristic efficiency evident even in her tone. "Wanted to inform you personally before formal announcement tomorrow. The board has approved accelerated timeline for international expansion based on your third-quarter projections and client acquisition metrics. Additional $3 million allocation for European market entry effective immediately, rather than phased implementation originally scheduled for second quarter next year." The news represented significant vote of confidence from our investors. Approval for expansion strategy I had advocated despite some board members' preference for consolidating North American market presence before pursuing international opportunities. "That's excellent news," I responded, genuine satisfaction evident in my voice. "The accelerated timeline aligns perfectly with our development team's platform localization progress and preliminary conversations with potential European distribution partners. Your consistent ability to deliver ahead of projection timelines inspired confidence for acceleration," Catherine noted. "The board discussed extensively and concluded that your operational readiness metrics warranted immediate rather than phased deployment of expansion capital." The validation, explicit acknowledgement that results justified accelerated investment, contrasted sharply with family dynamic I had just navigated, where demonstrated capability still struggled for recognition against long-standing patterns of assigned potential. The juxtaposition highlighted fundamental difference between environments where contribution determined advancement versus contexts where connection or credential influenced opportunity distribution. "I appreciate the board's confidence," I replied. "We'll ensure the accelerated deployment yields proportional returns through careful market entry sequencing and strategic partner selection." After discussing implementation specifics and agreeing to formal planning session later that week, I ended the call with renewed appreciation for the meritocratic environment I had intentionally built at Nexus, where results rather than relationship determined opportunity, where demonstrated capability rather than assigned potential influenced advancement decisions. That environment hadn't emerged accidentally or inevitably. It had been consciously constructed through specific policies, consistent messaging, and deliberate modeling of merit-based evaluation throughout the organization. From earliest hiring, decisions through most recent promotion considerations, I had established and maintained standards that prioritized demonstrated contribution over credentialed association or confident presentation. The power behind Nexus's throne wasn't inherited authority or credential leverage, but fundamental commitment to recognizing and rewarding actual capability rather than assumed potential. That commitment had created company culture where team members understood advancement depended on measurable contribution rather than relationship management or perception manipulation. Marcus had begun recognizing this distinction, albeit later and through more circuitous path than might have ideally served his professional development. His acknowledgement during brunch that genuine capability matters more than confident presentation, that measurable contribution creates more value than credentialed association, suggested capacity for growth I wouldn't have predicted possible even weeks earlier. Whether that recognition would translate to sustained development remained uncertain. Patterns established over decades typically resist permanent transformation through isolated insights, regardless of their apparent depth or sincerity. But the possibility existed for healthier relationship between us based on mutual respect for demonstrated capability rather than assigned family roles or inherited expectations. As I arrived home and prepared for afternoon review of European expansion materials in advance of tomorrow's formal announcement, I reflected on the parallel paths now unfolding. Nexus's accelerated growth trajectory authorized through demonstrated results. Marcus's potential development journey initiated through honest self-assessment. Our family's subtle recalibration based on undeniable evidence of our respective achievements. Each path represented possibility rather than certainty, potential rather than guaranteed outcome. But the foundation for meaningful progress existed in ways previously unclear or unavailable, creating opportunity for growth beyond historical limitations or established patterns. That foundation, stronger than inheritance, more durable than entitlement, more sustainable than favoritism, offered solid ground for building whatever came next, both professionally and personally. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.